now. Welcome everybody. My name is Christian. With me here today is my colleague, friend, co-conspirator, Brett Parry. We're here today for the ICF International Coaching Week, and we are conducting a session today for the topic, or on the topic, coaching with cultural competence. Welcome everybody. Thank you for joining us. If you're joining us just now, follow the example set by the others that have already done so. Find the chat box and let everybody know where in the world you are dialing in from for this session. And if you're joining us from a location that is not your place of birth or not your place of origin, let us know as well. We'd like to know how international in fact we are here today. We have about 60 minutes together, of which Brett and I will use one half or a little bit more than half to present our information for you. And towards the end, we will open the forum for a conversation around the topic with your input, questions, or with comments and challenges that you may have for us, or you might challenge us. We welcome that as well. We're by no means here to preach. We're here to share our experience of what we have learned over a collective 20 plus years of coaching across cultures with cultural competence. And we're simply sharing our best practices of what we have learned over the years. And we hope that you find it insightful and you may have your own experience along that topic that you might be willing to share with us and with the rest of the audience here today. So without further ado, let's get this puppy started. Let's get rolling. We're talking about coaching with cultural competence. And on this slide that you should be seeing, you see 3 books. One says training, one says mentoring, and one says coaching. And I deliberately chose that image because oftentimes these 3 terms get thrown into the same basket, and they don't typically mean the same thing. And most of you who are in the coaching realm, you probably know this already. We're not giving you any new information with that statement. And yet, I think it is important for us to make that distinction that coaching is not training, it's not mentoring. There might be overlaps, and there certainly are overlaps. And yet, when we coach somebody, we as coaches, we take on a different role. We put on a different hat than that of a trainer or a mentor. And we'll talk about the specifics, or how we define those specifics for us in our field as we go along. So who are we and why are you listening to us? Some of you already know us. I recognize quite a few names on this session, and there's a lot of people who probably see Brett and me for the first time. So who are we? Brett, why don't you start? Who are you?
Well, I asked that question many times. Thank you. Welcome, everybody. What a great, just going through the chat and letting people in. Welcome, everybody from all around the world. It's fantastic. Yeah, well, I'm one of half of Two Chaps, Many Cultures. This is a live show that we do together. My background, for those who don't know me, is Australian. Don't let the accent fool you. I didn't learn this on an accent app. I actually do live in the US. I've been here for 20 years, where I met and married a wonderful Polish girl. So, Dzień dobry, witam serdecznie to all the wonderful Polish people here. And my early career is in business. So I come from a business background, not an academic background in culture, and where I had the good fortune to experience attempting to try and do business across cultures. So it really, I have this kind of historical reflection on the challenges I faced. And now I actually do culture for a living as a business. I'm bringing that into the realm of supporting other people who do it through either one of those 3 lenses, the coaching, the training, or the mentoring. So very, very honored to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation, and looking forward to the presentation and chat.
Excellent. Thank you, Brett. Good day, Mike. My name is Christian Höferle. I'm pronouncing my last name the way most people in my home country would. Höferle is German. So I'm German by birth. And like Brett, I live in the United States. not in Chicago, but in Atlanta, Georgia, where the weather is warm and it's about to get humid and muggy. The summer is upon us. And willkommen an alle Deutschen, die hier in der Runde sind. I see there's quite a few German speakers here on this session as well. Welcome, everybody. Yes, Two Chaps, Many Cultures, a once daily program, now a program that we do as we see fit. It was born out of necessity and out of a, well, there's a German word for it that I have not found a good English translation for. We call it Schnapsidee. That's an idea you have when you drink liquor together. So we had this idea to do something during the pandemic and promote ourselves, our business, and our cause, which is working efficiently, communicating efficiently across cultures. And since we had all the digital tools at our disposal, we said, why not push that freaking button and do a live show on a daily basis? We are now at 195 episodes, and we are going to cross the 200 mark before the end of the month. And then let's see how we will continue with this. It has helped us to spread the word about our work, not just our work as Brett's work and my work, about the work of the intercultural coaching and training world. And we really enjoy doing that and being of service to our industry and our community, and also to spread the word about what these weirdos are doing when they talk about culture. As you now know, or as you already knew before you came in here, the basics mean that we are talking about coaching and not training. And many of you who are in the coaching field probably also work as trainers to a certain degree. And sometimes it's not easy to draw a clear line between those two worlds. When are we disseminating information, knowledge? When do we help our clients develop new skills or build on their existing skill set, develop additional ones? And when do we step away from the instructional part to being a coach who nudges gently and prods a little bit and encourages people to try out and practice the new information and apply these skills that they learned in the classroom from a book or in theory? Now it's about where the rubber meets the road, where we actually take it into action. And in the cross-cultural field that Brett and I work in, that line is often blurry. And yet we learned, especially through the pandemic and reinventing our businesses into a more virtual world, that the difference between training and coaching could often be training happens in the classroom, coaching happens online. Now that the world is becoming better at dealing with COVID, and now that we are beginning to see the effects of public health initiatives and vaccination initiatives, we might be getting back into classrooms, real life delivery very soon. Some of us have already begun doing so that blurry line will reemerge. But I think it's important for us to know that, especially in the cross-cultural field, yes, there is a distinction between training and coaching, and yet the two worlds often blend into each other as we work with our clients. But how is coaching different from training? I think for me, the simple answer is a coach asks questions and makes suggestions. A trainer, a teacher, instructs and makes, well, I want to say blanket statements, but disseminates data, distributes knowledge, right? So why do we need a special global mindset when we do this across cultures? Brett, when you first started in the business world, you were in retail and you had employees, right? And you were coaching your team members. Looking back at this now, how did that change once you started coaching across cultural borders?
Well, even at home, in the businesses I had was retail, and I was in a very multicultural environment. So even my employees and my clients were already multicultural. So as a business leader, as an owner, I thought it was my responsibility to, even back then, understand or at least observe what the cultural differences were being experienced by me and my business and the staff that represented me. And then, of course, we expanded across the physical ocean, and that became even more prescient. In fact, it actually caused a failure of one of our operations in Greece, when I fundamentally now understand that it was fully cultural. So it was a true and utter failure at the result of culture. And fast forward to now, when I mentioned I married my Polish wife, the experience of the real experience of viewing different styles, different interactions, different ways of discussing things was really tied to culture. Not early in our relationship, because I wasn't probably as aware of it, but now I am. It really has had an effect. So both personal, both business life.
Right. So we often use in our work with our clients, you see the logos that we put on. Well, we put on the logo of the Coaching Federation because yes, they are the hosts for this, and we are happy to be part of that environment. So, but you also see Brett's logo here up here, Cultural Mentor, and you see the logo of my company, the Culture Mastery. These are the colors that we fly when we enter the market, and this is how people recognize our businesses in the world. And when we do this, when we talk to our clients about global mindset, we often use metaphors like you're going out on sea, you're going out into waters that are unknown to you. A well-used metaphor in the cross-cultural field is that fish do not see water. And what that means is that fish are typically unaware of their surroundings. They take the water in which they swim for granted, and water is always there. And the joke goes that two young fish who swim in the water come across an old fish who waves his side fin at them and says, "Hey boys, hey young fellas, how's the water?" And the old fish swims away, and the two young fish look at each other totally bewildered and asking themselves, what in the world is water? So the unawareness of ourselves, of the culture in which we operate, becomes tricky for us, because once we leave our known environment, once we go abroad into waters that we are not familiar with, the danger is that we capsize. The danger is that our boat gets into heavy seas that might be hard to navigate. And I like this phrase, and you can see it back there on the banner behind me. If you don't get in quotation marks, if you don't get culture, culture will get you. It will bite you in the royal behind if you're not familiar or not aware of the fact that you're dealing with people whose actions, whose behaviors are based on value systems and belief systems and structures and identities that are different from your own. So when we approach foreign harbors, we need to be aware that there are unfamiliar behaviors, which affects how we coach people from another culture. So oftentimes cross-cultural coaching is seen as something, well, we help somebody adjust to a new cultural environment. And too often people forget that the coach and the coachee may have that very dynamic between them, right? So unless we as coaches are aware that we're dealing with people who not only are adjusting to a new foreign harbor, to different waters, unless we recognize that, we won't be able to help them in the way we could potentially. Coaching somebody from our own culture is comparatively easy. Coaching someone whose value system, whose beliefs, whose worldview is different from our own takes on a different level of complexity. And we're here to show you a few tricks of the trade, how you can identify the unfamiliar behaviors and how you might be able to navigate them, not close them, but navigate the difference, make actually use of the difference to your advantage. Because if you want to ride the waves of culture, as one of our gurus in our field once wrote a book, Riding the Waves of Culture. I think it was von Strompenas. Those of you who are familiar with our field may be familiar with that book. So if you want to ride the waves of culture, you need the right power skills. We call them ICE-Q. It's a combination of IQ, your intellectual prowess, CQ, cultural intelligence, we'll talk about this in a little bit, and EQ, emotional intelligence. So those three power skills, those cues should be in place if you want to be successful as a cross-cultural coach. As you might know, because we see the world through our own lenses, we have a perception of our world based on our experience. In neurolinguistic programming, some of you might be familiar with NLP. We call it the map is not the territory. We delete, distort, and generalize the information that we receive at any given moment, and we form our world, our mental representation of the world out there. And the world out there isn't the same for everybody, especially if we come from different cultures. Those perspectives take on a whole different meaning. Which also means that we might think that we know a little bit about the other culture, and we might also be aware of the fact that there's a bunch of things we don't know about this other culture. And yet there is this big piece of the pie that I still continue to unravel. After living in a foreign country for more than 18 years, I'm still discovering things that I didn't know I didn't know. So that red orangey piece of the pie here, still enough left to eat. I don't know about you, Brett, but I'm still discovering things that I wasn't even aware that I didn't know.
Absolutely, I agree with you. I did tell my clients I've been here 20 years. I'm still working. I'm still trying to work out aspects of the US culture, and of course Polish culture as well. Many cultures I work with, but I think they're the two main cultures that I engage with. And I just want to reflect on what Christian has said here, in terms of my own business framework. I see this as a real duty of care, as all of the people on this call no doubt practice, is a real depth of care for the people you coach and the people you lead and guide. And I think just adding this part of it is such an important thing to do, both for yourself and for your clients, because it shows that extra depth of curiosity as to what really makes them tick as a person. You've already gone through obviously many great coaching exercises to establish that. Adding this is really oftentimes, especially by minority populations, a way of just recognizing you see them in a really in a deeper way, even than they expected possibly. And so I've always found it very enriching, the positive feedback I get from people when we introduce this aspect into a coaching relationship.
Yeah, thank you. So how does cultural intelligence play into here? Why is cultural intelligence your anchor or your lighthouse, your safety beacon for coaching with cultural competence? Because first of all, we need to acknowledge that culture affects everything we do as coaches, or every behavior that we want to help our coachees change or adjust. Culture
That's
impacts
Christian's boat, by the way. That's Christian's boat, by the way.
I think I own one of the ropes leading to it. I wish. So all our behaviors, whether it is how we communicate in general, how do we negotiate? How do we negotiate conflict? How do we resolve it? How do we give feedback? How do we establish and maintain rapport? How do we give or revoke trust? How do we introduce ourselves? How do we come to agreements and commitments with each other? How do we get yes? And how do we distinguish a yes from a maybe and a no? All of these things are based on culture. So cultural intelligence, CQ, what is that? It's a concept that consists of 4 elements. We begin in the top left corner, CQ drive. That is the initial spark. You want to be driven to know about culture. You want to be interested in learning about the difference or the commonalities and how you can adjust to those. So the drive is the number 1. If you're not interested in this, go back to your cave and find the spark that lights the fire. Maybe you'll have a warm meal tonight. I'm exaggerating, but you want to have the drive at first. From the drive comes CQ knowledge. So you learn, you get the basics, the data, the information. You probably need a trainer to understand how cultures are similar and different. Step 3 is CQ strategy. So how do you use your own awareness and the knowledge you gained? How do you use that and apply that in your multicultural interactions? And step 4 is CQ action. How do you use it? How do you apply it? Action. I mean, the term itself says it. And once you apply the new knowledge based on the strategy that you helped your client develop, or first of all, develop for yourself, once you put it into action, you will recognize that you'll be driven to even deeper levels of cross-cultural understanding. So this is basically a self-propelling cycle of becoming more culturally competent, right? So as you put it into action, your drive will increase. After all these years of doing the work that I do, I still continue reading stuff about this. I still immerse myself into what can I know more about this. So I'm living proof, and so is Brett, that once you put it into action, your interest will even increase, and you will find out, you know, remember that orange piece of the pie, you want to see how big it is. So let's look at some of the tools of the trade that we use. So we often use in cultural intelligence, we use what we call dimensional comparison instruments or frameworks. Those comparison frameworks have a huge advantage. They allow us to graphically and systemically recognize and display similarities and differences between cultures. They also have a huge disadvantage. Most of these frameworks are built upon the idea of national cultures. Now, this is a fallacy to assume that nationality equals homogeneous behavior within its borders. However, it is an approximation. So whenever we talk about nation cultures, please keep in mind that there are variants within. So we're looking here at this, on this grid, you see countries represented like the United States, or like China here. I don't see China, but we see the US, we see Germany, we see Brazil, we see Mexico. All of these are cultures that are not homogeneous within. They're subcultural groups within one nation. And these comparison tools allow us to at least, like, imagine like an airplane flying, I don't know, 30,000 feet above ground. That gives us a big picture comparison. Of course, as we dive into this, you know, the circle that is continuing, we will get more granular. Now, this image here is comparing two sets of behaviors, and they're around communication. So you see the horizontal axis that tells us whether a culture is okay with confrontation in communication, or whether it avoids confrontation. Confrontation is something that is frowned upon in that culture. And the vertical axis tells us how much emotion is involved in the communication. Is it expressive? Do I use a lot of body language? Do I get emotion? Do I get in your face? Or am I more stoic, and am I using a more monotone voice? And do I not allow emotions to get in the way of my argument? Right, so we can overlay these two aspects of communication, and you see several countries / cultures represented on this grid. And it is easy now to recognize, well, if you're dealing with a German who is very much okay with confrontation, however, does not like to have their emotion get in the way, dealing with somebody from India or from the Arab world, that might be a bit difficult, right? Because confrontation is received as quite negative there. And if you're not willing to show emotion and show who you are, then how can we trust you? So these macro gaps are something that we want to be aware of. And as cross-cultural coaches, we need to know who we're dealing with. Now, again, as I said, these are approximations. This is not at this level that you're looking at, not exact science. Another element would be how leadership is showing up in these different countries. You see horizontal axis. Is it a more egalitarian, participatory type of leadership, or is it more hierarchical, status-driven on the other end? And vertical axis is telling us about whether that leadership is executed top down throughout the organization or whether it's consensual. And again, you see cultures that are close to each other, their dots, and others who are far and far apart. So these are things that we want to take into consideration. These are models, these two slides that you've been looking at, these are models from a book called The Culture Map, written by Erin Meyer, that we can highly recommend as a good starting point for this. But we have more of this. Brett, any comments on this?
No, that's perfect. I've always, again, just to affirm what Christian said, part of this is also that we're sharing it here on this slide, but this is in a book, and you can buy the book. And we also invite you to have your clients be aware of this. Make them aware of where you're coming from when you're opening up that discussion about the possible differences you might have with them, or indeed the possible differences you might be coaching them through in terms of their conflicts or others with work colleagues, family, friends, so on and so forth. So they are powerful tools.
Right.
And 𝙤𝙤𝙦 is another tool. This is one that I use rather extensively. Many of us use extensively. Again, a 30,000 foot view from a perspective of just cultural dimensions, a psychometric tool based on responses from a survey that participants are invited to do. But there are general cultural guides and cultural profiles that we do put in. And the validity of these is drawn from research and data, as well as the input from the participants themselves. So over 1 million people have taken the 𝙤𝙤𝙦, have done their own 𝙤𝙤𝙦 profile. So it's a very, very robust tool. But again, if you're coming into a relationship with somebody and you offer them the opportunity to reflect on and put a bit of a framework around what their cultural preference is. This is not so much a personality, but it's a working style preference across these 5 dimensions. Now, you can go a lot deeper and more granular, just as the previous slide showed. But this is a really great way to open up a conversation and gather and gain credibility and trust with your clients, because what you're doing is you're offering them a tool that's very robust and based in real data and facts. And so it's a less personal, it seems less personal, but it is a wonderful way that's not directed personally at an individual. It's a generalization to start a conversation. When they do their profile and perhaps compare it to your profile, you could build it into the coach and coachee relationship to say, how are we going to go forward with this relationship if I am very direct and I might tell you things that might make you uncomfortable, and you are indirect, and therefore perhaps I need to understand how can I encourage you to be a little bit more direct and explicit with me. So this is about bridging, then taking this and then getting a little bit more skills around bridging these gaps. And in a business sense, I literally say to people, the gaps are actually a really great possibility and opportunity, because the diversity of thought, the diversity of work style and preference is something you can really build into your organization to make it a fully rounded organization and therefore show up better for your clients.
Right. And I thank you, Brett. I want to acknowledge the conversation that is going on in the chat, because someone asked about what other books will we recommend aside from the culture map. So just to make sure, I randomly picked some from my bookshelf back there. So the culture map by Erin Meyer, that's the one that we talked about in the beginning. Another one that was already mentioned in the book, anything by Richard Lewis. There's the big one by Richard Lewis, When Cultures Collide. It is truly a big one. That's if we talked about 30,000 feet above ground with the models that we introduced here, Richard Lewis is probably 60,000 feet above ground. It's a different approach. It's a linguist's approach. Some of this is really great. I'm not 100% on board with all of his conclusions, or this is a great starting point as well. And then we talked about riding the waves of culture, right? So von Strompenas is somebody that might be of interest to some of you. And Richard Lewis co-wrote a book with Kai Hammerich about the fish that can't see the water. So I didn't make this up, other people did. David Livermore wrote a book about leading with cultural intelligence, also something that I would recommend. And finally, not finally, but the ones that I could quickly pull from my bookshelf, Andy Molinsky's Global Dexterity is something that I think any cross-cultural coach should have read. Andy's a great guy. If you don't know him, reach out to him or reach out to us. We'll help you connect to him. He teaches at Brandeis University in Boston. Book was published, Harvard Business, Global Dexterity. Quite a good read. So these are the cultural dimensional frameworks that we could use. There's many of them out there. Many of them are valid. We simply prefer GlobeSmart. There's others that are great too. Country Navigator, Hofstede's dimensions. There's Argonaut, and I don't know how many are out there. And some of them are great. Others are almost as great. And they all have the same limitation, which is they focus on country culture, which, as we already established, is a concept with some flaws. That's why culture in and by itself, or the cultural framework comparisons, do not, as a cultural coach, doesn't always help us completely, right?
Did anyone pick up on that diplomacy, that unusual, un-German diplomacy from that? Some are great, some are not so great. Is that the almost as great? I thought that was fun.
Well, see, I've improved a little bit of a time. I'm like wine.
You've adjusted.
Throw others under the bus the same way I did 25 years ago.
Yeah.
So in addition to cultural comparison, we also work with personality profiles. And again, there are dozens out there. We're not saying that the ones that we like are the best. Of course, we're saying that. And yet there are others out there that do the job as well. We like this one. It's called BANK, Codebreaker. It, like many other personality profiles, it segments humanity into 4 personality archetypes. In this case, blueprint, action, nurturing, and knowledge. And that's a values-based assessment. Every one of these personality archetypes has a preferred set of values. Now, none of us are one personality type singularly. We are all a mixture of all 4. And the extent to which these individual archetypes show up in our personality give us indication on how we make decisions. This is a values-based personality profile that helps us understand people's decision-making process. Now, why is decision-making, that's why I found it attractive to my work. Why is decision-making process relevant in the coaching field? Because I would like to know how people give a yes or a no, how they agree to something, because what we decide to do becomes our behavior. It's those of you who had the pleasure of taking Latin in high school, remember, decide comes from decidere, to cut off from. I am cutting off other options in order to follow one. And that becomes my behavior. Those become my behavioral patterns, my strategies that are either supporting me or not. They may become a non-supportive behavior that, as a coach, you might want to help your coachee to unpack and maybe course correct. So helping with the cultural profile and the personality profile, these are tools that are our go-to tools in our toolbox to discover human behavior and quickly understand who are we dealing with and how do we best communicate with our coachee.
Excuse me, Chris, and
now,
just what is your Crack My Code extension? I'm just gonna.
We'll post that in the link. Well, my extension is my last name, Höferle, with OE. So if you want to type that in,
yeah,
real quick,
I'm gonna type that in. That's someone was just asking about the tools. So yeah.
Oh yeah. All right. Thanks for paying attention. Yeah, you go to crackmycode.com/Höferle, which is my last name. It'll take you to the light version of the assessment, which will allow you to read these 4 tiles that you see here and sort them in order of relevance for you. And then you put your email in and the system will send you a quick debrief on what that means. This is, I would call it the gateway drug. A more in-depth assessment can follow after that. It's a 20-question questionnaire, which will give you a clearer answer of which percentage you are of each of these four archetypes and what that means in your communication with others. So that's the first step. And Brett, also, could you also type in the, oh, you already did globesmart.com, right?
Yeah,
Maybe
GlobeSmart.
you want to add the,
Yeah.
can you make it clickable, Brett, with a full URL for both the bank code and the GlobeSmart?
Sure, my mistake.
That would help people probably.
I'll do that.
All right, so go ahead, Brett.
Oh, I just wanted to say the GlobeSmart, type it in. The GlobeSmart to do your own profile is free as well, so it's a good way to kind of get your own profile, but get an idea on what it looks like in practice with the recommendations and so on and so forth. So yeah.
Noel is asking, is it possible to get a doc? We are recording this, Noel, so there'll be, we'll put this on our YouTube channel, and we'll ask ICF to distribute that to everybody who had registered. So you should be able to get a recording of this to take your notes or rewind the tape if you need to. Brett and I, we did a webinar series last year, and we did it for 7 minutes for 7 days. We thought we would change the paradigm of webinars and make it a real short one. And we defined 7 success strategies for global business. We call it here for global coaches. So what are these strategies that we find are relevant? Brett, humility versus self-importance. What can you say to that?
Oh, I'm sorry, I was typing in.
So
yeah, well,
remember, go ahead.
I will give an example from my own culture. Of course, I came to the US in a little rowboat and thought, well, I watched a lot of American TV and a lot of movies. I know how these people tick, right? It's just the same as me, and I speak the language. However, I do come from a culture that prefers a more humble approach to life and self-expression. And there is actually a term for it in my culture called the tall poppy syndrome, where that being bold and self-important, showing self-importance is not as celebrated as perhaps it is here in the US, where it is actually essential for many people that come here when they're putting themselves out in the world to be quite comfortable with self-promotion, self-importance, and making a big bold statement. It comes through confidence and expressing a business idea and so that very difference really fundamentally changed the way I had to manage staff in the US as opposed to staff back in Australia, and it really did have a huge impact on me. That's just one example. There are many cultures that kind of on various different points in this dimension, but it is an important one to start with.
And I think it's critical, especially for those of us who hail from the so-called, I'm putting air quotes around it, Western world, where we have learned that it's perfectly okay to promote ourselves and thereby often giving ourselves importance around the work we do. And while I'm not challenging that our work is important, if you're dealing with people from the other side of the globe, this will backfire, especially if you view your coaching relationship as something of a peer-to-peer exercise where the coach and the coachee see eye to eye. This will work in cultures that are, as you saw in a slide earlier, who are more egalitarian, where hierarchy and status do not play such a big role. Now, imagine doing this with a coachee from a culture that is more hierarchical and where status and authority are delineated by your position, your age, your job, your education, and many other factors. You will not be seen as a peer if you're a coach. The expectation of you as a coach is to be an authority figure, or your coachee might not challenge you or give you the feedback and openness that you might expect from, let's say, a North American coachee. So all of these factors play into how the dynamic between coach and coachee will evolve. So it's important to be curious about this. So if you don't care, and I don't have to tell you this, if you're here, because you're engaged with ICF. If you're a coach or about to become a certified coach yourself, then you know that curiosity didn't kill the cat. It actually opens the gateway to new insights. So indifference is something we deal with, though, on the coachee side once in a while, that coachees appear to be indifferent about the new insight, especially as it pertains to adjusting to new cultures. Now, this is a tough one, Brett. Self-awareness versus mindless. How often do you come across this in your coaching practice?
Well, I think that the very nature of the work that we do is through the lens, or let me step back and say my process or my journey into self-awareness was actually through the lens of culture. And so, for example, I was very blind to what drove me as a leader and as a motivator and as even as a parent, and a husband cross cultures. So the self-awareness is fundamentally important, and it is different across cultures where it is perhaps a more homogenous society, where the homogeny leads one to be very focused on a narrow set of cultural frameworks that they've been able to grow up in and maybe speak one language, maybe not have to be exposed to people of different backgrounds, and so on and so forth. So these things are just, some people come from those cultures. It's not wrong or right, but it is it can influence how they do business, how they show up, and of course how they show up for you across cultures with other people and manage people. So
thank you. Inclusiveness versus excluding. Now, I think this is a big one, especially in these past 18 months. Not only pandemic, but the world has become a little bit more aware of how we may have been excluding others in the field, whether it is that we select our clients based on an exclusive approach, or whether we, I don't know, there's many ways people can be exclusive in the way they work. It has certainly shed, the past 18 months, that certainly have shed globally new light on how inclusivity is a tide that lifts all of our boats. So I think as coaches in a organization that builds itself international, ICF, I think this is almost a foregone conclusion. If we still have to talk about this, then we may talk about the fundamentals of coaching to begin with. But I think it's worth mentioning this, that as a coach that works across cultural borders, you will find in yourself that your levels of inclusiveness may have not been as strong as you thought they were in the beginning. I speak for myself, and I know from conversations I had with Brett that he had similar experiences. I recognized a lot of my biases through the work that we do across cultures, and the work has helped me as a coach to become more inclusive. It wasn't always an easy process, and yet it's been an ongoing one that I find very rewarding.
There is actually another tool. We have another tool, the inclusive behaviors in. I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm going to put that. I'm just typing it up. So the inclusive behaviors inventory. So you can actually test this as well. You can test your own ability, your own, how you show up in terms of your ability to be inclusive. And sometimes we think that this can be confrontational and maybe uncomfortable to find this out about ourselves. But I would invite you just to sit with that comfort, and because even people that I've been surprised with, people that do DEI work sometimes show up as and they're willing to work on it, but they sometimes show up as maybe having some areas in the inclusive realm to be inclusive themselves, even though they do the work themselves. So it's a really great way to kind of just get back to self-awareness. Yeah.
Right.
I'm going to type that into
So
the chat
if you
as
find
well.
that tool, there it is. There, you look at that, folks. That's a good one. Perceptiveness versus tunnel vision. Now, again, as coaches yourselves, you probably are familiar with this concept anyway, that tunnel vision is something, I mean, this is one phrase of expressing this. It's finding and helping clients discover their self-imposed limitations, right? So getting away from the blinders that we may wear, or from tunnel, or from, I don't know what other metaphor we can use for this, expand the choice for our clients. And we can do this by being perceptive about the cultural aspects of our work, right? If we as coaches are not perceptive enough to recognize that limitations that our coachee may have are based on the environment in which they were raised and the culture that formed them, if we're unable to perceive that, then we won't be able to help them remove some of those roadblocks that are hindering them from being more successful, right? So it starts with us as coaches. Basically, I'm reminded of my grandmother, who always said, "Oh, stop pointing your finger at people, because 3 fingers are pointing back at you," right? As a coach, we are in our topic here that we're rolling out here today, is we need to be aware of our own crap first, right? And there's a lot of stuff that we may have to deal with, especially when we work across cultures, that we haven't been aware of as we begin this process.
And Annabeth,
and that means,
sorry, Christian, Annabeth just put a question about the cultural basis of coaching in and of itself. So I think that's that is a good one, depending on what you're, again, how you're defining, and I think Cookie's just wonderfully answered back there. But it is, depending on what you're coaching on, right? So there is, but then also the what we referred to before, the ability or the comfort for somebody to maybe share with a coach can be culturally embedded, and you might see that getting through that is one way of getting through that is introducing the client to the tool and understanding that that's not a fault of theirs. Some of these things are just culturally embedded into their psyche, depending on what culture they come from. I'm not sure that answers the question, but it's actually a pretty big topic that probably could do with its own presentation.
Yeah, but that's an excellent question, I bet.
Yeah, great.
So as coaches, you probably know this already, that you sometimes will not have the right answer for your client, or better yet, that your client may not come up with the answer to their issue during a coaching session immediately. So being okay with your coachee not to reach a level of clarity immediately is something that I had to learn as a coach across cultures, because as long as I did this with people that are very similar to me, I could fairly easily drill down and help resolve some issues, or help a client find the answer. So I don't know how you see this. I don't see myself as a coach who gives answers. I find myself a coach who asks high quality questions, so a client comes up with their own answers and has immediate buy-in because they had the idea, not I did. Sometimes when you do this across cultures, that answer may not appear immediately. And as a coach, to be okay with that ambiguity is to me, it was a learned behavior. I don't know about you, Brett, but it wasn't always easy in the beginning.
Yeah, well, I'm pretty comfortable with ambiguity. When it comes to the GlobeSmart profile, my risk profile is right off to the left. I'm very comfortable with risk, and with risk with ambiguity comes risk, the comfort of with risk. So it's, I quite enjoy it, but that's just a cultural thing for me.
Exactly. And finally, optimism versus pessimism as a success strategy for global coaches. Yes, you will find yourself drained after a coaching call or coaching session. You will find yourself believing that, man or woman or human, this person that I just dealt with, they simply enjoy being stuck in their state, or they are unwilling to open up to the idea that there might be another avenue to resolving the issue. Stay the course. That's what I've learned, is that the learning, the insight, the aha eureka moment for the coachee may not come when you want it to appear. It will sometimes appear at times when you least expect it. Sometimes even long after the coaching engagement has ended. I had quite a few of those where people called me or emailed me and said, hey, by the way, remember what you told me in May last year? I finally understand what you mean. And like, yes, what took you so long? But it doesn't matter. They came up with the answer for themselves. And that's, I think, is one of the big rewards for the work that we do.
I love this optimism versus pessimism with my personal relationship with my wife, because being a Polish girl, you know, and I've stolen this joke, the joke about the Polish optimist and the Polish pessimist, where the Polish pessimist says it couldn't possibly get any worse, and the Polish optimist says, oh no, don't worry, it can get worse, right?
Yeah,
so
right.
and that for me, cross-culturally, is a way of understanding. Sometimes my wife can just bring up, well, what if this happens? What if that happens? But this could fail and that could happen. And I go, well, yes. And that's a very Polish thing. And I understand that, but trust me, has half of this stuff ever happened that you've said? It is, and I'm being affirmed by my wonderful Polish colleagues in here, but but really early on, I did misunderstand that. And I think and then, of course, my understanding had to go back to the historical aspects of the country and the region itself, and so on and so forth. So it can be quite fun if you actually really step back and understand it. So, yeah.
Well, and I want to take this away from Central and Eastern Europeans. Yes, Polish people, Russian people, Ukrainian people, you own that. That's all right. If you want to own that, that's cool. I have a coaching client right now here in the US, and he is of Latinx background. He is Central American background in his family. And he was born and raised in New York. So he is the picture book New Yorkan with a Latinx background. And every issue that he runs into at work boils down to a cultural difference. And he works for a US company. He has a US passport. He's a US citizen, raised in the US. So we're talking at face value, there is no cultural component in the work that I do with him. And yet every session, it boils down to the same concept of cultural difference. It's mostly hierarchy, it's direct, indirect communication styles, and comfort levels with risk shows up without exemption in every coaching session. So this is not just a thing that what we talk about in working with clients across the globe. This may actually apply to your clients that you're already working with domestically, right? So culture and cross-cultural differences are not a thing that happen beyond a political border, as I said in the beginning. So
Rhonda did make the comment about the affirmation that culture is grounded in history. Having traveled to China quite a bit and done business there, I really only started to understand the depth of or the cultural preferences there when I really looked at the history, and I became a bit of a cinephile and studied it and got fascinated with it. A lot of it can be drawn to historical, and that's another big discussion. Sorry, Kristen. Yeah.
And to answer Rama's question here, whether I point or identify the cultural difference to the client, at some point I do. Yes, when I have a rapport that is deep enough, then I will certainly point it out, and we go through the exercise, we go through the frameworks. And now that he's realized it, he's like, oh, now I see what's going on. Yes, you're right. So he was not consciously aware of it himself, because he figured, I'm American, I work in an American organization with American colleagues, how hard can it be? And now that he's beginning to recognize that there are cultural differences within a political construct, it now is beginning to make a much more sense for him. So coming back to the metaphor of waters and going out into the unknown in this global world, I want to conclude this with using this blue ocean strategy that some of you might be familiar with. So in working across cultures, you have a choice. You can stick to the way you've always done it. You can insist on doing it your way. That's the red ocean. You see, that's the shark-infested waters where you're dealing with competition or obstacles, because insisting on your way will get you a certain distance. It will not get you all the way. Or you can be more successful working as a global coach by recognizing that your skill set will need a few more tools in the toolbox. We're not saying that we have them all. We learned a few over the years and we're still learning to add more tools. And yet we discovered that what got us here is not enough to get us further. So I want to open the conversation here and by a show of hands, let everybody ask their questions, and Brett and I will monitor it as well as we can to answer questions in the remaining time. I know we're getting close to the hour, but we are able to stay on longer if you want to. We're willing to answer your questions beyond the hour. I want to make sure that you all get the link in the chat box to this ebook that we published on. It's really a brief short read, about a dozen tips for efficient communication across cultures. So it summarizes a lot of things that we discussed here today in an ebook format. So use the link that I posted in the chat box. That'll get you there. It's complimentary. You just claim it for yourself. Now, we answered quite a few questions in the chat box, but maybe there's a few more questions that we haven't addressed yet. So feel free to raise the hand or take yourselves off of mute and we'll go through it step by step. And don't go all at the same time. Brett, are you seeing raised hands?
No, I'm not, or I'm not looking in the right place. Hang on. Let me just scroll down. Let me see.
Okay. So if you are not happy to ask a question right now, that is perfectly okay with us as well. There is a way for you to stay in touch with us. On the last slide you see our contact information. Use the phone numbers, please don't misuse them. Use the email as much as you need, and you see some of our social media handles there as well. This is how you can easily stay in touch with us. If you would rather answer some of these or ask some of these questions outside of this open forum, we're happy to answer them in a one-on-one or maybe in a more intimate session that we can schedule with each other. I hope this was informative to you. We hope we added some value to your day. I want to explicitly thank the International Coaching Federation's local chapter here in the state of Georgia in the United States. Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Karma. Thank you, Jennifer, for inviting us. Thank you for giving us an opportunity to share our experience with your members and fellow practitioners. And again, this will be recorded and posted somewhere on the interwebs. Look out for an email from ICF. And any final last words from you, Brett?
No, just thank you so much. Thank you for being curious enough to jump on here and join us for this journey. We love it. We weave it into our everyday lives, but be careful once you get into this. It can be very addictive. It's a wonderful way to understand your fellow humans. And after all, we're in a world that is no more needed than any time before. So really appreciate everybody for joining. Thank you.
Thank you, danke, dziękuję, gracias, grazie. What else is there?
Shukran.
Shukran. And obrigado.
Spasiba.
And sheshe. And I'm running out of thank yous I can give.
Thank you.
Thanks everybody for joining us. Oh, tusen tack. Yeah, there we go. Swedish, tack, or Norwegian or Danish. I don't know. Yes.
You're mixing up your Scandinavians.
Dankjewel with Dutch. Yeah,
Dankjewel.
excellent. Dankjewel.
Obrigado, yes, some Brazilian, yes.
Spasiba, Maria. Spasiba, I forgot spasiba. There we go. All right.
Right.
Oh, and teşekkür. Teşekkür ederim. That's the only Turkish I know. There we go.
Yeah. And in Australian, it's see you around like a rissole. And
exactly that. Thank you, everybody.
Right. Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much. That was awesome.
Thank
No
you.
worries. Who said that? Who said that?
I think I got that.
Oh, I
Yeah.
got that. Dziękuję bardzo, dziękuję. Yeah.